you are listening to the Kinetic Man Podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm David, and we want to walk with you on the journey to living a life defined by uncommon action that is full of purpose, adventure, and meaningful relationships. Our goal is to refine our why while helping you find yours, and together achieve our best and highest purpose. In the end, we'll drive each other to leave the potential life behind and become kinetic men.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Stu. Hey, have you ever had an idea for the Kinetic Man Podcast? We want to hear from you. We're always dreaming up ways to make this podcast more valuable for our listeners. So we want to hear what you've loved and what you want to hear more of so we can make future episodes even better. Go to thekineticman.com/survey to help us make the podcast even better. And listen, if you do this before the end of October, you will automatically be entered to win a $100 gift card. Take the survey today at thekineticman.com/survey and be entered to win. Thank you for being an amazing listener. See you. All right. Hello, everybody. I am excited about this conversation. Grace, welcome to the Kinetic Man Podcast. I think this is our first guest from the UK. So forgive me ahead of time. I'm going to have to get my
the breathing
listeners.
coach. Wasn't he from the UK? Or
Oh, no, he was Australia.
He's Australia. He's Australia. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we're broadening our horizons.
We are. I'm excited. But let's just get into it. Grace, you were recommended to us by a mutual friend of ours, Deb Mashik, another great author. We read her book and had her on, and she recommended we have you on. So if we could, just give a little bit of background about who you are and what you do.
Sure thing. So I will try and translate any odd words that come across.
Yeah. Thank you.
So,
I appreciate that. David needs as much help as he can get.
Well, around about 16 years ago, I started up my own business as a coach. This came out of what I affectionately called my midlife crisis in my mid-20s, where I had a career crisis. I left my corporate career in marketing, and then I also started a family. And it was at that point that the real identity crisis started. But what this actually ended up leading me to was really just getting back to what is it I do naturally, and what is it that brings me to life. And so I ended up doing this thing called coaching, which back in 2008 was not a thing you could apply for a job for. So ironically, having started a business, I now do marketing every single day of my working life. But what that has led me to is nowadays what I tend to do is I help people with, I guess, productivity, work-life well-being, resilience. So how do we work? How do we do that in a way that does us good as well as the good that we're doing out there in the world?
Well, and you gave yourself a title, which I love, of Productivity Ninja.
Love it.
I love it. I absolutely love it. David, again, he needs a lot of that. So this is just going to be a mentorship session for David, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Well, the credit for the ninja title actually comes from Graham Alcott. So he wrote the book How to Be a Productivity Ninja, and I joined forces with him 11 years ago to be the first female productivity ninja as part of the group at Think Productive. So that's the work that I do in companies and organizations, helping people with things like their inboxes, their meetings, just getting their work done and having a life outside of work.
Yeah, I love all of that, actually. And one of the things that really appealed to me when you're on your website, you have an awesome website, has all your books, resources, but when in the About You, you described yourself as naturally disorganized, and I immediately resonated with it. If I showed you my desk right now, if you look at Stu's desk and my desk, very different environments. But I think that's because Stu doesn't have a lot of friends, so there's not a lot of correspondence on his desk. I'm just kidding. One of the things I want to go back on before we dive into, there's so much here, right? And there's so many things that I think are very related to what we do in the Kinetic Man, and not only, and I'm very passionate about coaching as well. I do one-on-one coaching, and so there's so many things I want to get into. But one of the things you said that really resonated just now was this idea of identity crisis. And we have found, particularly with a lot of men, especially here in the United States, a lot of us are just kind of reeling because of this whole idea of not knowing what our role is as a man. But also, we see it a lot, and as men trying to be the best husbands possible. I'm sorry. I look very closely to my wife into my mom, into the women in my life, and I have a daughter as well, and trying to really, you see women in particular also struggle with this idea of motherhood and balancing that with a career, and then pouring themselves so much into their children that, I see this in my mom. Once you come out of that stage of life, it's almost like, man, who am I? Because I poured so much into my children and my kids, and or even kids, career, all these different things. So if you don't mind expanding on that a little bit, just for yourself, because I think we could all gain so much in understanding how somebody could go into that, have it experience, and then come out of it a better, more whole, self-aware individual.
Yeah, I'd love to. And to give you a little bit more context as well, I grew up as very much a straight A student at school. So, I was kind of the perfectionist, people pleasing, all of those things. And my midlife crisis was a really interesting one, because I found myself working in a startup. And so if you're working in a startup, there's not many places you can hide. And it's often full of overachievers. Everyone's ambitious. Everyone wants to, to really sort of hit the highs of success. And the one thing that you can't do in that environment is fake it. Well, I couldn't anyway. And that turned out to be a real gift, because while I can do most things to a very good, very high level, what I realized was to kind of take it up that notch of success, to really get the most out of me. I actually have to bring it back to, well, what does get the best out of me? And who am I really? And how do I bring my best to this situation, rather than how do I do what I think other people want from me? And so, it's sometimes what I call the curse of competence. When you're good at doing most things, you can get by in lots of different situations, but you can end up in a situation where you're doing something kind of good enough, but really it's not bringing you to life. And when it's not bringing you to life, you're also not giving your best. So with hindsight, this was kind of like a gift to me, because I had that gift of clarity. And what that helped me to do was really just kind of strip away all the expectations. And I love that you brought that question of like, what does it mean to be a mom? Because when I first had my child, I went through a period of what I would probably call Frankenmom, where you just try and like put together all the best qualities of all the mothers you've ever known, in real life and in fiction. And you go, that's who I want to be. And of course, that is just too big. And you set yourself up for failure. And so what I had to do, and there's a mantra that I adopted from a fellow mom who was slightly ahead of the game. Her kids were older. And it's one that I use a lot, which was to be a good enough mom most of the time, with intermittent lapses into hopelessness and brilliance, rather than aiming for that perfection. And I think my journey was very much about understanding, okay, so who am I when I'm at my best, and how do I give that? So, maybe I'm not the mom who is great at sewing, costume making, sewing, my kids are better at that. In fact, here's a funny story. When both my kids, I've got two kids, a boy and a girl, and both of them, when they were at nursery, or do you guys call it nursery, or is it
playgroup? Yeah, preschool.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. So, in the role play corner, where they have like the iron and the ironing board, and and the kitchen and the cooker, both of them said, "I'm ironing like Daddy."
I love that.
Because they've never seen me iron.
That's hilarious. Well, and Stu, I can explain later what it means to be good at certain things, because Stu's he's probably not going to resonate with when you talk about that. But
I definitely don't know about ironing. That's not my
that's not your strong suit.
No.
I love that, and I just want to reiterate the Franken mom, right? And the Franken dad, the Franken anything. I love that imagery, because we're not living in our best. So I love how you highlight, the self-awareness to understand what I'm good at, what are my preferences, and then to action those things, because naturally I'm going to find more joy in those strengths and those things that I was created to be. But also it requires a level of self-awareness, right? It requires you to do some work to understand who you are, and then to live in your zone of genius. People call it a number of different things, but I'm just happen to be reading The Big Leap right now, so the zone of genius is very fresh on my mind. But the idea of not being able to go there unless you know who you are. And I love that. And the Franken idea, if you really look at Frankenstein, it's pretty ugly, right? It's pretty ugly mishmash of things. And that's not our best, self. So I really appreciate you highlighting that.
Well, and I'm assuming that in that journey, there was quite a bit of struggle in that as well, right? There was probably a lot of times where you were challenged. It was messy. And you kind of stayed in that, which kind of brings us to your current book about struggle. So if you could just give the audience, give our listeners just a little idea of what that book is about, and then I kind of want to dive into some more of this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book Struggle was actually born out of conversations with coaching clients. So clients who had come to me for productivity stuff, and we'd work together, and they were like, okay, I feel like I've got my head around the productivity side of things, but there are still times when I'm struggling. Help, what's going on, Grace? And the more that I had those conversations, the more I thought, hang on a minute, we tend to equate the word struggle as almost the opposite of being productive, but that's not actually telling the full story. The more of these conversations I have, the more I'm realizing, okay, if I'm struggling and I'm seeing that as being the opposite of being productive, I'm going to want to do something else. But actually, sometimes the thing I'm struggling with is the most important piece of work I need to do. And sometimes just because it's hard doesn't mean that you're in the wrong place. It can mean that you're in absolutely the right place. But the other thing that I noticed as well is actually some of our best work come from those moments of struggle. So David, you picked up on the fact that I'm naturally disorganized. And that is the reason why I resisted specializing in productivity, because I thought, hang on, this is the thing I struggle with. Why would anybody want to come to me for help with productivity? But actually, it turns out that gives me a different perspective. And if I think about my kids and their education, if I wanted to hire a maths tutor for one of my kids, if they were struggling with maths, would I want to hire the maths genius? Or actually, would I want to hire somebody who knows what it's like to struggle with it, it doesn't come easily to them, so they know what it's like, but also they know how to map that journey of, okay, here's how we get to work with this stuff. Here's how we figure out how to get this to work for you, rather than, hey, it's so easy. Why, you just do this, don't you? And so it's really interesting that actually in my journey in business, but probably also in life, it's actually noticing those moments of struggle can give you some really useful information. And the more we pay attention to that, the more we can use that. And sometimes that's where we make the surprising discoveries. That can be where we innovate. That can be where we come up with the discoveries. But it can also be where we grow as well.
Yeah, and it's so empowering to make that mind shift. We often talk about things like, if it just put differently, but exactly what you just said is, if I'm struggling with drinking, well, I want to talk to the alcoholic, not the teetotaler, right? Like I want to talk to the guy or the gal who struggled through it, has overcome it, and then can actually not only empathize, but give practical advice on how to. So you being naturally disorganized, well, but yet you've written, the 3 books, you're coming out with a series of, coordinating across the Atlantic with somebody to put forth a series, and we could touch on that as well. But I think it's very empowering to take some of those things and realize that there's gifts in that struggle, not to just wallow in the perceived failure of those things. So I love how you highlight that. Hey, I'm curious, how do you differentiate the struggle and like when you should, because there are times when we should be like, okay, I should probably look elsewhere or do something or change the effort and not just continue to bang my head against the wall. Like, when do you know that? Because struggle isn't always a virtue, right? I mean, there are virtuous things about it, but how do you know when to pivot or potentially adjust?
So I think the thing that helps is to stand down the struggle of struggle. So we struggle with struggle because we think that it's a sign that something's gone horribly wrong. And so one of the metaphors that I use in the book, actually, that's really helpful, is to think of struggle as a tunnel. So when you're in a tunnel, you tend to get tunnel vision. So you look for the exits. It's like, how do I get out of here? How do I get rid of this, get over this? We even talk about seeing light at the end of the tunnel as an analogy of hope. But what if we can shine a light in the middle of the tunnel? What might we see instead? And so to do that, what we need to do is kind of stand down the initial instincts of struggle. So if your initial instincts of tunnel vision is, I need to get away from this, I need to get out of here, it's basically fear that's writing the story. It's that fight and flight instinct, basically. Whereas if we can recognize, okay, this is a struggle, but it's probably not a life and death situation, probably don't need that fight and flight instinct right now, then what we can do then is go, okay, don't need to get away from this or get over this quite so quickly. Instead, what is this? What am I dealing with here? What am I noticing? And so by standing down that fear instinct, we can actually broaden our vision. And then from there, I think we can make a wiser decision about what's the next step to take here.
While you're talking through that, I'm thinking to myself and curious if you have a thought on it. I feel that this is the Kinetic Man podcast, and the majority of our listeners are probably men. I'm curious if you see it, but I feel like that men have a harder time with one, realizing that they're in a place that they need help, and two, asking for help. There's so many times where, just example would be, we're driving somewhere and my wife and I are in the car and we get lost, right? First thing my wife says is, hey, why don't you just stop somewhere and ask, right? Ask for where this place is. And my tendency is just to keep on trucking, right? Like, keep on going. I'm not going to stop and ask. I don't want to feel weird and admit that I'm lost. And I feel that men specifically struggle with that more than women. Have you seen that at all in your coaching and through your own, due diligence there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting, I think it's very cultural. So I think, men have been encultured to think that strength comes from independence and, competence, being able to do something and being able to do it on your own. And actually, when you layer that over Western culture as well, Western culture is very much towards independence. And I find this fascinating because I've grown up mainly in Western culture, but my family is Chinese. And so I remember listening to a podcast once where they were discussing this kind of the sort of East and West view. And you had an American man who was talking to an Eastern European woman. And what they found was that the sort of Western culture tends to be, what can I do? That's the first question. Like, what do I do? Whereas the Eastern European sort of culture was much more collective. It's, who do I know? And so who do I ask? And so I think you've got two layers there, the sort of East-West thing, the individual versus collective culture, but also you've got the gender thing as well, in that women are more likely to lean towards, who do I know, who's my community, whereas men are more likely to lean towards the individual, what can I do? And I think what's useful sometimes is just to notice that, like noticing that as a tendency, but also notice how that gets ramped up when there's a little bit of fear involved. Now, when I say the word fear, I don't mean I'm feeling scared, or I'm having a panic attack. Fear is just that thing that drives our actions towards, basically, if you think about fight and flight, back in the days when we lived in tribes, this is what we needed to survive. So if there was a threat, we would either go, what's the weak spot in my enemy, or what's the escape route? How do I make myself safe? But the other thing that fight and flight drives is survival of the fittest. So you want to prove your worth. You want to prove to the village that you are worth being part of the tribe, and that you can contribute. And so, I think if we think about it from that perspective, then anything that challenges, for men, anything that challenges your ability to prove yourself can also trigger that sort of fight and flight instinct, that lizard brain instinct. For women, it's rejection from the tribe. So anything that means you don't fit in and you might be rejected, can't survive on your own. So again, it's that sort of, that's why a lot of women struggle with fitting in, with the people-pleasing things. And so what I find really helpful with this is when we start to kind of regress back to that thinking to go, oh, this is what our brains have evolved to cope with. It's to cope with a very different lifestyle to the one that we lead now. And actually just even recognizing that can help us to go, okay, if that's fear driving me and I don't need it right now, how do I stand down that fear and then engage the rest of my human brain?
Yeah, I love and I'm just curious. My question is, have you found there to be other tactical ways that are extremely effective to deal with the fear? And so I love that you said sometimes it's just acknowledging can really break a cycle, right? And I've been telling my kids lately, because I've been doing it. I've not done this my entire life, but I've started applying this. No joke, when you take 10 seconds and you count to 10 or you take a deep breath, excuse me, there is a very real thing that happens that will enable you to potentially make a better decision. Or if you're extremely stubborn, like Stuart, potentially not like me at all, maybe it takes 15 seconds, maybe it takes 20 seconds, but there's something very real that happens, and it sounds so silly. But I have found that to be an extremely effective tactic to allow your brain to engage before you react. And so I'm just curious, what have you found to be most effective? And is it ubiquitous across the sexes, and potentially are there things across cultures that are effective to deal with this fear, to kind of, outside of just acknowledging it or recognizing it? Or is it very specific to you, self-awareness, and you just digging deeper into yourself?
Such a good question. I think you and I'd be keen to hear from you and from your listeners, actually, because I think that there is a personalization to this. There is an individual self-awareness element to this. But I think universally, buying yourself time is helpful. So that's why the counting to 10, counting to 20, whatever it is, or recognizing. So sometimes, when I talk about this in a productivity space, I talk about email rage. Like road rage, but with email. So just naming it, to go, okay, I'm experiencing email rage right now. Step away from the computer. Do not press send. I will not feel better afterwards. That kind of sense of buying yourself time is really helpful, because that fight and flight instinct is designed to override the other parts of our brain. It's designed to kick in when there is an emergency response. So even recognizing this is not a fire, this is not an emergency, it doesn't warrant that emergency response, step away, come back when I'm thinking a little bit clearer. That can help. The other thing I'm finding really helpful as well is movement. So there's a great book called Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. They talk about completing the stress cycle. So again, they look into this as sort of primitive survival instinct that we have, and they kind of look at back in those days when we lived in tribes, what would happen after that stress reaction kicks in and you've either fought off the bear or run away from the tiger and you're finally safe. There are a couple of things that would happen there. First of all, the movement, so the action moving. So our stress response is primed to give us strength to our muscles, so that we can either fight or we can run away. So when we're experiencing that sense of stress, actually one thing our body really wants to do is to move. And I was talking about this actually with somebody who is a foster carer. And so one of the things that she helps the kids that she looks after is dealing with anxiety and dealing with extreme fear reactions. And one thing that they noticed was, if you're feeling that sense of panic or I need to get out of here, or that sense of stress, just moving your feet. You don't have to actually be going anywhere. Just moving your feet helps to tell your body, it's okay, I can move if I need to. I can escape if this turns out to be a life threat. And again, it's kind of serving that purpose. But the other thing that would happen once you've escaped and you've got back to safety is you'd probably get around the campfire. Maybe you would cook the thing that you've just killed. You'd tell stories about the fight or the how you escaped. And so that sense of gathering around the campfire, the sense of conversation and bringing that community back together, I think that's the thing that can sometimes be missing. And that's the thing that, especially in our landscape of struggle, what we tend to do is we don't talk about it. We go, well, if I talk about my struggles, then someone might think less of me. So I don't think I'll talk about that. I'll just talk about the successes. I'll just talk about the highlights. And doing that, we make struggle a taboo, but also it means that we don't get to process what's just happened in those conversations, in that safety of that community.
That's so good. Stu, I know you have a really good question. Probably not as good as the
way better than yours.
Asking, but I will say, Grace, I love how you highlight the community part of it and the way that you tell the stories. One of the things that we're pushing so hard in the Kinetic Man is all about, really, it's all about the community. It's about surrounding yourself with other men and then being vulnerable. The ground rules to what we do are vulnerability and honesty. And what we found, and we just got back from a retreat up in the mountains with a bunch of men, and every time we come back, at least one guy is brave enough to stand up and say, I was completely honest, I was vulnerable, and it was extremely comforting to know that I was not alone in my struggle. Right. And so the benefit of the community and the benefit of a lot of other groups, they tell you all the successes and how great, and I make all this money and I'm so good looking and all these things. And we're like, you're not that good looking, I'm looking at you. But that aside, it really, there's the stories when you look around, you're talking about a struggle and where the perception is that you failed, at least your perception is that you had a failure or a struggle. The people are so engaged. They're so engaged. They're like, oh my gosh, that is a great story. I've also felt that way. I've made that mistake. I've done this thing. And there's solidarity in that struggle and in that fail. If you want to call it a failure, call it a failure, but it's a lesson. And you come out of that, even as just an observer, not even necessarily sharing your story. You highlighted the merits of sharing. You feel so much better. But as an observer, you come out with a sense of comfort, a sense of closeness. Like I've never grown closer to somebody when they told me all the great things and the successes that they're experiencing. But I have grown closer when I'm able to empathize, when I'm able to share and be in a struggle with somebody. And it makes it that much better. It's awesome, right? The bonds that are formed through adversity are way more powerful than the bonds that are formed through, we had another success, another great victory. We're the best, right?
So true. And it's funny because the thing that makes us fear struggle is often that fear of disconnection. It's a fear of, I'm going to be rejected from the tribe. People are going to think less of me. I'm going to be judged, all of those kind of things. And yet, look what happens when we actually share it. It's the opposite. It's that strong connection that we form out of that adversity.
So Grace, as dads and, really on a mission to be great fathers and great husbands, how do we take this and teach our children to do the same thing, to not fight or flight, but stay in the struggle and endure it and understand that it's better for them? How do we do that with our kids? How do we model that?
I think we can have some great conversations with our kids. So one of the things I write about in the book is how, for me as a mother, I noticed that as my kids got older, something changed in our relationship. So when they're babies and they cry, it's basically, I need to do something. I need to fix it. I need to make it better. But actually, as they get older, and it might be crying, but it might also be, I'm struggling with this. This is hard. I need you. All of those kind of things. My answer to that actually needs to change, because if I dive in and go, hey, it's not that hard. Let me do it for you. Let me show you how. Let me fix it for you. What they hear from me is, it's not that hard. You shouldn't be struggling. And so what they feel is, oh, maybe there's something wrong with this thing called struggle. Maybe there's something wrong with this feeling. So actually what they need to hear from me more often is, yeah, honey, it is hard. And we can do hard things. And so, the more that we can model to them, this is what it's like to struggle, and it's really normal. And this is what we do when we hit struggle, the more that they will know that it's okay. And also that what we can do is go alongside them to help them navigate, okay, what does it look like to struggle with something? What does it look like to then figure out? But also, what does it look like to notice and name? So when we talked about noticing and naming earlier, noticing and naming emotions, having that vocabulary of being able to actually put our finger on what's that emotion, what do we call it? And this is fascinating, again, coming down to the gender thing, because one of my friends is a psychologist, and she works in a young offenders prison, and she works with young men. And one of the things that she does with them is basically teach them the language of emotions. So it's like, when I get this feeling and I just want to punch someone, what is it I call this feeling? And it could be a whole load of things. It could be anger, it could be rage, it could be frustration, it could be hunger. It could be tiredness. So even just having words to describe and being able to label and name our emotions, it is such a useful tool to then give our kids to be able to name that thing of like, actually what I'm feeling right now is loneliness. And that's making me want to lash out. But actually what I need is connection. And so when we can start to name those emotions, we can also start to name our needs. And that's when the magic happens.
Yeah, I love that. We around here call, when you want to punch somebody in the face, we call that the Stu factor. But that's just what we call it.
I think my 5-year-old wanted to punch me in the face this morning. He was
oh, my 7-year-old was, my 7-year-old was all about that. And I'll tell you what's really interesting to that point, Stu. My 7-year-old was struggling, and he did kind of lash out, and that's not something that is ever acceptable, in our house. And I found myself, if I rewound a year before really, digging in and then doing some of this work for myself, my reaction would have been very different last year. I probably would have responded with his hit or attempt to hit with a, potentially maybe something physical, like restraint or something. And I left the room. I said, "Hey, buddy, not acceptable." I left, took a deep breath, came back, and I'm like, "Man, you just need a snuggle, don't you? You just need a little love. How about I give you a piggyback ride down the stairs?" And immediately he's like, "A piggyback ride?" And I was like, and I lay it on him. And I'm like, "We can do it like a koala, or you can get on my back. So you can hold on my front or my back." But just that, typically my emotions were still there. My emotions were still there initially of anger and being like, "Dude, what is wrong with you? You're 7. Like, I made you waffles. There's chocolate chips in them. Like, lock it up, dude." But I really stepped out, had a chance to think about it. I'm not patting my own back. I'm simply saying these things work. And I was able to walk back in and offer a different solution, a different toolkit, which comes naturally to my wife, does not come naturally to me. And it ended very positively. And not that I do that every morning, but it ended positively. And so, it's fascinating to me, this idea of naming it, because that's something I use with my one-on-one clients, which are all men. And when you go through something, you're like, "Hey, let's just name that. Let's take that. Let's not get off of that. Let's name that thing. So next time it comes up, we can describe it. And we can say, this is what it was." That is such a powerful tool. It's very tactical too, right? Okay, why am I so mad at this 7-year-old? Oh, well, he's threatening my authority. I'll just call it threatening authority, whatever it is. And you're able to deal with it. And so I love how the tactics are so good. And I would encourage our listeners to go back and just listen to some of these things, because we all want to be better human beings. And that's part of your mission statement, right? Is to helping people to be the best, to be better, and to do the things that impact the world. Not to, I forgot the language you used, but it basically to serve the world, not to beat the world down. You framed it much better. But it's very, very effective. And I also love this idea of showing our kids struggle, and it's okay, right? So I think we met Deb, Stu, correct me if I'm wrong. We met Deb through Lenore, correct?
That's right. Lenore Skenazy.
Okay.
Yep.
So we read Coddling of the American Mind, which Lenore Skenazy was a significant part of that book. So we reached out to her. She also wrote Let Grow. She's that whole movement with children and letting them struggle. And then we met Deb through that. And then we met you through Deb. And so there's a common theme throughout that it is not bad to create an environment in which we can grow through friction. And we can live and thrive in that. And there's a very real thing and you seems like your focus is more on adults. Is there a point that you just can't teach old dog new tricks, and the struggle is real and it is what it is? Or, I mean, are we flexible enough to continue to grow through this?
Yeah, I think you're never too old. And I think it is a matter of will. So it's choosing into it. It's recognizing, so yeah, because actually all the experiences we have and the decisions that we make will shape us. And yes, when you've had many years of thinking in a particular way, that is a well-worn path and it's easy to find yourself going down it. But at the same time, I talked about releasing perfection right at the beginning of the call. Same thing goes with this as well. It's you find yourself heading down that path and you notice it and you go, okay. And maybe sometimes it takes you a whole week to notice it. Sometimes you start practicing it, you start noticing it within maybe a couple of days. And then actually the more you do it, but also the more, again, going back to that thing of us not being alone, the more we can spot it in each other and being able to create an environment where where we can notice it and name it for each other, then your kids could turn around and go, hey Dad, I think you're having a bear mode right now, or whatever it is, and we can help each other through that in that way as well.
Yeah. Go ahead.
When we can grow from that, right? We can.
Yeah.
I love the idea when you say, hey Dad, you're in a bad mood. My immediate click is defensiveness. Oh, well, yeah, because you guys are a bunch of turds and now I'm in a bad mood. But no ownership there, right? But even recognizing your tendencies, I think is a very it can be a life-changing thing. And I just want to give dads out there and moms hope we can change, because my natural inclination is just to react in an emotional way and create a very negative environment in my reactiveness. But sorry, Stu, to interrupt you, but it is possible to change, and you're going to struggle with it, but you can be better, which is absolutely powerful.
I still have some work to do. I didn't react in the same way that you did this morning, David. I have some apologies to do later on to my 5-year-old. Grace, one of the things, one of your quotes in the book, and I've underlined it, started, like, love it, is resistance is a sign that says this is the work that really matters. And I love that. I just love the thought of that when we have resistance, when we have struggle, like, stay in it and understand that this is what matters. Like, this is the work that matters. And you talk about struggle being a source of hope. And I'm curious, can you just explain that a little bit better, for our audience? Like, how is struggle a source of hope for us?
Yeah, so I think sometimes we think of hope as, the sort of silver lining, that when everything's going to be all right, and the sort of Disneyland at the end of the rainbow, all of those kind of things. But actually, I think hope is it's an action. It's a thing that's very live. It's grittiness. It's clawing in. It's believing in something even before you see it. And so in that way, struggle is all about hope. It's about going, okay, this is, there's resistance here. It's not easy, but I'm believing that there is some good work to be done here. And so that's what I'm choosing to lean into. So I think it's that kind of owning hope as an action and as a way of being and doing, rather than just a destination where everything's all perfect.
That's so good. That's so good. I can't imagine a better sentiment to end on. And I just want to thank you very much, Grace. There's a couple things. One, people need to go to gracemarshall2ls.com and look at all the resources. There's 3 books available there. There's a blog. There's just getting to know you better. I think your meet Grace part, the way that you framed it, even the way you end it, 100% human, it really resonated with me. Just the way that you did that. I think we have some work to do on our website and go in there and really reflect who we are. But and world changers, not world beaters. I apologize. That was the phrase that you used. But I just love I love the fact that you're able to not only take some of these things, this idea of struggle, these complex and oftentimes not desirable traits, and write amazing books to help us get through, whether it's our disorganized nature, whether it's our lack of productivity, whether it's our imposter syndrome, whatever it may be, these things that typically can be seen as things that hamper us and transform them into tools that can absolutely benefit us. And not only us, but again, to enable us to be world changers. And so I want to acknowledge you being a world changer, taking action, writing books. I'll be honest with you, you probably don't even recognize it. I don't know why you would, but the fact that you highlighted your natural tendency to be disorganized, and yet you have these incredible books, that really inspires and motivates me to be like, man, I can do this too. I can sit down, I can write a book, regardless of how disorganized I may or may not be, but most likely maybe, and still make a significant difference and significant change. So thank you so much for that. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Hey, Grace, one
Awesome.
last thing. I know, we'll put your website in the show notes, but you had mentioned something coming up called Adventures in Uncertainty. That just sounds awesome. Can you tell us about that before we go?
Absolutely. So, yeah, we've been talking about struggle, and struggle doesn't always feel like an adventure, but it can be. As we've talked about, it can be the place of growth, it can be the place of discovery, it can be the place of connection. And so that's what we want to create with Adventures in Uncertainty. So it's a 5-week online series on Zoom where we look through and we work through and wrangle through some of the stuff together. So it's kind of like the virtual campfire, where we're envisioning that there'll be a group of like-minded, a community coming together. Everybody's on their own personal journey, whether that's a work struggle or a business struggle or a family struggle, personal struggles, but we're all coming together to share our stories at the campfire, and also to unpack some more of the book. So it's being run by myself and Christina Kisley, who's based over in your side of the pond. So it will be transatlantic, and I'm just really looking forward to gathering a group of people, a group of fellow travelers, to work through some of this stuff together.
That sounds awesome. And when is that?
So it starts in November.
Okay.
So I'll give you the link. You can share that with your audience.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds really cool. Well, hey, guys and gals, check out Grace Marshall. Check out her books. Great read. I loved Read and Struggle. And we'll put show notes for Adventures in Uncertainty. And Grace, again, thank you so much. This was a really, really fun conversation. Guys and gals, go check her out and go take uncommon action. See ya. Man, we have exciting news. We're opening up the next house of the Kinetic Man Mastermind. I tell you, it's the most important hour of the week that I attend. I change every single week for the better to become the best husband, the best father, the best friend, and the best leader in our community. This is a time that you can choose to make a major impact in your life. Go to thekineticman.com and sign up. It's an application. It is exclusive. We are looking for the right man to take action and join us to be the hero of their journey. Come join us, thekineticman.com. Do it.
Thank you for listening to the Kinetic Man podcast. If you are growth-minded, community-focused, and willing to take uncommon action to redefine success and live an abundant life, visit our website at www.thekineticman.com to see all the ways we could connect.
And on our website, you can find more information on everything we're doing, like joining our Meetup page to get the details on our webinars and our local Thursday gatherings here in Colorado. From our site, you can also find more information on and sign up for the next Kinetic Man retreat and the next house of our mastermind group. Finally, we always appreciate your love and support. Please share this episode and go rate us on your favorite podcast player of choice.
Thank you again. Now go take uncommon action.